By way of introduction, Mr. Basil Downer has over 30 years experience in human resource management and occupational health and safety, and is currently a lecturer at the Caribbean Maritime University. Having graduated from the University of the West Indies in 1982 with a Bachelor of Science degree in social work, Basil continued his professional career as a public sector servant, working as a personnel officer for the Department of Correctional Services and other government departments. He soon transitioned to the maritime and logistics industry, working for the Shipping Association of Jamaica for over 20 years, first as the Industrial Relations Officer, then as recruiting manager, then operations manager, and finally as a revered consultant. A lover of education and development, Basil has completed a plethora of professional certifications and training courses over the years, garnering a wealth of knowledge, which he now passes on to his students at the Caribbean Maritime University. Mr. Terrence Brooks currently serves the Shipping Association of Jamaica as the Deputy General Manager. He joined the association in 1995 as recruiting clerk. He's a second-generation employee of the SAJ, following in the footsteps of his father, Rudolph Brooks, who was one of the association's most noteworthy and influential stevedores. Mr. Brooks is a proven high performer who has received successive promotions. Prior to being promoted to Deputy General Manager, he had full responsibility for all human resources management and development functions in the SAJ and associated companies. He was previously Operations Manager, Recruiting, Labor Planning and Deployment Manager, Senior Operations Officer, and Recruiting Supervisor. A specialist in labor planning and a practice data analyst. In his current role, Mr. Brooks also has direct responsibility for the management and deployment of a pool of stevedores and special workers to the Port of Kingston, as well as the K-9 Division, Security and Facilities Units, and Staff Canteen. His experience encompasses areas of trend forecasting, industrial relations, strategy development, and planning. Therefore, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Francis to lead this morning's discussion. And just to give you a little reminder in terms of housekeeping, as the discussion progresses, you're asked to kindly insert your comments or questions in the chat section. So without further ado, I introduce Francis.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Glenn, for your kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. It is good to see you this morning. Those of you that I can see all the names. And it's great, you know, just to be here this morning and to have the role to facilitate these discussions on labor management and conflict. Our presenters, our speakers, Mr. Downer, Mr. Brooks, both have worked with the Shipping Association of Jamaica for extended periods. And the Shipping Association of Jamaica, you may not be aware, it's actually a labor union. And it was birthed out of, you know, the needs, not only the employers, but the workers in the Jamaican shipping industry, the Port of Kingston, many years ago. So I think that it is appropriate that our first step is to just get a bit of the historical context. And I would like to direct a question to Mr. Downer, just asking him, historically, can you give us a little background of the Port of Kingston, the profile of the workers and expectations? You know, what was it like many years ago? Because I know that you have researched, you have quite a bit of knowledge of this area. So Mr. Downer, give us the historical context, please.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to take this opportunity of giving you some information as to the background. The Port of Kingston began in the downtown area, and this was many, many years ago. And we operated there on what we call finger piers. And cargo and cruise vessels from all over the world would come to Kingston. In the early days, most of the workers were unable to read or write. And so that presented several challenges. In the 1970s, modes of cargo and other innovations taking place, in the shipping industry, the wharf operations moved to Newport West, which is a more expansive location. And some of the innovations were put in place at that time. As was mentioned a while ago, the SAJ became a registered trade union in 1939. And what had happened also is that the SAJ became the sole negotiator for the members of the association. What had happened is that the labor leader at the time was a very smart man. And he would start with the employer number one and go right through if there were 15 or 20. So if he started to negotiate for $1 per hour, by the time he gets to the end of the list of employers, then he would probably reach $10 or $15. And so the association's members got wise to this strategy. And so this was how the trade union status was attained. We, just like now, we have many members. And at the time in the early 70s, port was operated by Grace Kennedy, or one section of the port by Grace Kennedy, and another was operated by the Port Authority. That's what we call the container terminal now, was operated by the Port Authority of Jamaica. The SAJ became sole employers of port workers. And so, with the problems that are coming up with workers, the association had to come up with new strategies as how to manage these conflicts. So in 1952, August 26 to be exact, the Joint Industrial Council for the Port of Kingston was established. And so it took quite some time learning from experiences and the various challenges, so that over time, the association and its strategies evolved to what we have now. It was not easy, because operating with workers who were mainly illiterate posed a special challenge. But the JIC came in, and having been established, it helped us to solve a lot of problems. So one of the things that happened, subcommittees were formed. And so we had, for example, manning, issues related to manning. How many workers should be employed to do a particular job? We had a stevedoring committee as well. And then we had disagreeable cargo. Then we had dangerous cargo as well. And there another committee would have been the disciplinary committee. So in that, now schedules were developed and penalties and offenses and so on. Also with regards to health, there was a subcommittee on health, and there was a safety committee. And so with all these challenges, the association had to come up with various strategies. It was during this period that the a safety and health manual was written. for the Port of Kingston.
Mr.
So-
Downer, could you tell me a bit who sat on this Jamaica Industrial Council, the GIC? Who sat on this council?
Okay.
And how was the representation? You know, how did you decide who would be on the council?
Okay. The Joint Industrial Council comprise the members of the companies. So the Shipping Association management and representatives from the member companies. They comprise the management side. The unions, there were 3 trade unions: the Bustamante Union, the United Port Workers and Seamen's Union, and the National Workers Union. So each union had a union officer that represented them, and there were delegates, worker delegates from each of these unions. And so each month, it is a monthly meeting was scheduled, and so each month there were meetings to discuss whatever problems that would come up. And recommendations or discussions that were held at the subcommittee level had to be ratified by the main body of the Joint Industrial Council.
Can you tell us of some of you have told us some of the subcommittees that were in place, that were established. Can you tell us some of maybe the landmark decisions, or give us a feel for some of the things that were discussed and some of the breakthroughs that were made at this council?
Usually, there were problems with workers, and conflicts arose between a worker and the supervisor. So, for example, if Kingston Wharves, in a particular section, say in the warehouse, there was a conflict between the worker and the supervisor, or even between workers themselves, there were discussions at that level, and a timetable was set. So if it was not settled within a certain time, it was referred to another level. And usually by the time it comes to the end of the month, when the Joint Industrial Council met, these problems were brought up at the GIC. Sometimes the meetings were very stormy, and workers then tried to walk out at times and threaten to strike and so on. So these are, for example, disagreeable cargo. We have cargo that comes into the port that by its very nature, either by the fumes that were exuded or reflection from sunlight. We have things like tin plates, for example, and we have material that comes in bags. The bags may be burst, and so we had to negotiate a special rate apart from the normal hourly rate that would be paid. We had to negotiate another rate at which the workers who participated in these exercises would be paid. So most of the time it affected the number of workers that operate in a particular environment and what they are to be paid.
Thank you. In terms of, so the workers were represented by, of course, the unions, but they had the opportunity to attend these meetings as well?
Yes, the workers would come into the room where these meetings were held.
What would you say was the greatest benefit of this council? And does it still operate today?
Yes, the Joint Industrial Council still operates today. And the benefit is that people would get, the workers especially, would get the opportunity to explain themselves. Most of the time, you know, they would be in an angry mood, but the discussion would take place. Sometimes during these meetings, we had to take breaks, leave the room, cool off a little bit and come back. But the discussion that took place helped to improve the environment in which we operated.
And these were the workers. About, at that time, How many workers would you say were involved in this, were represented
in
at
the
this
region
level?
in the region of 500. There was more than 500 in the earlier days, because our mechanization came in, so less workers were hired. But in the late 1980s to the 1990s, there were about 500 workers. And I must also point out that if there was any matter that was not settled at the Joint Industrial Council, either the union or management would report this matter to the Ministry of Labor. The Ministry of Labor has a conciliatory machinery, and sometimes that doesn't work either. After going through conciliation, we have what is known as the IDT, the Industrial Disputes Tribunal. And here, the management would submit its brief, the unions would submit their brief. Sometimes they even had to employ lawyers to present their cases. And the Joint Industrial Council, whatever they ruled, is binding on both parties. And sometimes, so it was a very stormy period when we have to go through at these various levels. Not very often, but I think once matter was taken to the courts. But so overall, we have the level coming from the supervisor and the worker, then to the Joint Industrial Council, then we have the Ministry of Labor, the conciliatory machinery, and then we move up to the Industrial Disputes Tribunal. So these are the various levels where conflicts could be discussed and resolved.
So you said that these meetings were often steamy and very confrontational. Is there any strategies that were used to come to resolution in most cases? Anything that stands out in mind, that brought resolution in most of the cases? Because it's not often that you had to go to the Ministry of Labor to get resolution. What do you think was the strength of this?
Well, the main strength is that management had to learn to remain calm, and to whatever was being said had to be done in a way to solve the problem. Anything that would, any word, one word can cause a flare-up. And so each member of the team had to be very cognizant of the situation. And not anybody could speak. We had somebody who was speaking. So if any member of the team had a point, want to raise a point, they would pass this through to the main speaker. And so that was very challenging as to how you diffuse the situation.
What year did it start? Remind me again.
The Joint Industrial Council?
Yes.
The JIC began in 1952, August 26.
And it still is in place today. That would say to me that both the management and the workers found this to be a forum that, addressed problems and, prevented it, that there was resolution at this level. Would you say so?
Yes, there was resolution, many resolutions at that level. Although we, at times, the workers got very angry, but management side had to try and diffuse the situation in whatever way. And the building of confidence is very important. When the workers had confidence in the management at the Shipping Association, that was better for all concerned. Because remember that we operate in an atmosphere where productivity is very important. And the meeting of schedules is very important, especially these days when we have the container vessels coming in to discharge and take on cargo and move on. We have to be cognizant of this because a lot of the vessels come through the Panama Canal, for example. And so if the vessel is late, then there's additional cost to the shipping line. And so we have a responsibility in the port to get our workers to understand the nature of the business. And at first, this wasn't appreciated, but as we went along, the workers began to understand that if we cannot maintain the business, then there'll be no jobs. So this was very important that we educate the workers so that they could understand the nature of the industry we are in.
You had mentioned one subcommittee, the health and safety, that subcommittee. Tell me
Yes.
about the background of that committee. Why was that committee so important?
For two reasons. The general health of the worker is important. And you know that we have a type of culture where people do not like to go to the doctor. And so we had to educate the workers that one, diet and exercise are very critical. The healthier that each person is, then the more they'll be able to, the longer they'll be able to work and work in a situation where they're not going to the doctor every minute. So the health subcommittee would discuss these matters. Seminars would be planned, and so the workers would participate. We had, as a result of that, we had the annual medical where the workers had to attend. Then the other side of it now was the accidents. Accidents were many, many, many. Simple accident is in lifting. A worker is lifting, and lifting improperly can cause damage to his body. And so we had to get all these over to the workers for them to understand. So as a result of the level of accidents that were taking place, we had to come up with, we had to go through every single job and work out how it is to be done and done in a safe manner, and at the same time, keeping the levels of productivity up. So there were two areas on which we focus: the general health and then the accidents.
Tell me a bit about the Health and Safety Act that was developed and what sort of input came from the shipping industry and of course, into developing this act for Jamaica.
Jamaica had a Factories Act of 1943. And by the time we get to the 70s, it was actually redundant because it did not speak to all the situations that had developed. And so for a long time, we were trying to develop the Jamaica Safety Act. And this did not come through until 2017. It took a long time. So the members of the Shipping Association made contributions, and the recommendations were put together and submitted to the Ministry of Labor as to what obtains in stevedoring in a port environment. And so the Safety Act, no, Occupational Safety and Health Act, that is very critical to our operations, and it included operations on the port. It even deals with office safety. A lot of people think of only of the shop floor, but in the office, a lot of accidents take place there. So the Jamaica of our Safety Act of 2017 is now in operation. And this is one of the things that we use as a guideline. We have other guidelines that we operate by. For example, the ILO conventions, and also the International Maritime Organization conventions. The IMO deals mostly with the matter of handling and storage and transportation and disposal of chemicals. And we get a lot of help from these international standards. And at first, most of the ports in the north, in Amsterdam, for example, they put out a lot of training materials, but we later found out that Australia was a great contributor to training, so we looked in those directions to get guidance and to maintain best practice, international best practice.
Thank you, Mr. Downer. As we are on health and safety, I want to bring in Terence Brooks at this point. Terence, because health and safety nowadays is, even at this time of the pandemic, we're all being affected by COVID. Everyone here on this discussion in this training session, and COVID and how the impact that it has had on the Shipping Association. You as Deputy General Manager of the Shipping Association of Jamaica, can you tell me about what has been the experience and, coming out of your concern for the health and safety of all the workers, what sort of strategies have you put in place?
Thank you, Francis. Morning again, everybody. It has indeed a challenging time for us at ACB. However, I'm happy to share with the group that we've been very fortunate to date. At present, out of an organization of approximately 350 people, we've had a half a dozen positive cases. To date, we've only had 2 hospitalizations. We have not had any deaths. That is important. I don't believe that our partners in the industry, larger port operators, are able to post those figures. We've been very fortunate. I'm not saying that our success to date has been solely about our way. Yes, we've put in the protocols in the building. We've tried to inform our workers as best as possible about the pandemic. So outside of sanitation protocols, we've also hosted a series of webinars that were designed to reach members of the industry at their desk. We invited prominent doctors. Later on, we went to an expert on vaccines. This doctor, eminently qualified, he studied in the same lab in Oxford that the AstraZeneca vaccine was created. And that type of information sharing, we believe, allowed us to get real credible information out to our stakeholders. Given our role as an association, we also took lead through our occupational health department to assign our own industrial occupational health nurse to visit organizations who are members of the association, to actually visit the offices, observe their own protocols, and make recommendations based on areas that we would have seen lacking. And those combinations of effort, as well as just staff buying into what we were trying to achieve, communicating the dangers, the perils of a wide outbreak on the port, that would be disastrous. Not just the shipping association members, but also wider Jamaica. It depends on the port community for goods and services. So it has been a joint effort. It has been hard work. It has been vaccines in. It has been down to one-on-one discussions with people, trying to get them to the other side. I've personally made trips to vaccine centers just to go with employees who are still unsure, but indicated some willingness. And we've been able to work with them today. No deaths, no hospitalizations. We believe it's good, and despite the Delta variant and MU, we hope that we can continue on this path.
You say, in Jamaica, there is a large amount of vaccine hesitancy. So it has become a matter of conflict in many discussions. And that's, just in terms of to take the vaccine or not to take the vaccine. How do you address a worker on this matter? This matter of conflict, it may be religious reasons, medical, how do you recommend that this be addressed with a worker who is maybe reluctant to take the vaccine or has decided not to take the vaccine? What are your recommendations and your experience in this area?
I've not seen any religious grounds that people are putting forward. What I'm seeing is purely misinformation. So I think the first step is to meet the misinformation with facts as best as you possibly can. It also helps that because you have an existing relationship of trust, you will now have to call on that relationship to have these discussions. The people in your organizations who are closest to port workers, to stevedores, will be the persons who need to carry this message. They need to hear from people that they trust that vaccines are safe. You need to be able to demonstrate that you also have done it, because you cannot go ahead and try to preach the gospel without first being a convert yourself. So Francis, it's really about leveraging the level of trust and the relationship, providing sensible, factual information. There's nothing that wins an argument like taking up a Gleaner story that says 98% of people in the university hospital are people who are unvaccinated. The other 3.2% are persons with one shot. That is a fact. So we're not going to international media, so you cannot use the argument that CNN is trying to trick you. This is your homegrown Jamaica Gleaner that you read every day that says the chief medical officer is telling you what is happening in the university hospital today. Vaccines do help. It's really about constantly hammering home the message. No ridicule. Life come from different walks of life, different frames of references. It's really a matter of how you break it down to their level. Keep the lines of communication open, be consistent, and leave the rest up to sense.
Both you and Mr. Downer have mentioned this matter of trust. We're just into this discussion this morning, and trust is a word that both of you have mentioned. I want to go back to Mr. Downer first, and then I want to hear from you. How do you build trust with a worker? So let me hear from Mr. Downer on this matter, and then I would want to come right back to you after, Terence.
Yes, trust comes through different angles. And so there's a one-on-one relationship. And as you get to know the worker get to know you, then the matter of trust is, becomes very important. Then as a company, the association became a good corporate citizen. Way back in 1984, a training and welfare department was set up. And so this was the training of the workers. We went into things like employee housing. We sponsored basic schools, children's homes, and the association was engaged in sports activities where sports like cricket, football, and netball were sponsored. Then education was critical. There were scholarships and bursaries that were set up for employees' children. And so right up to the tertiary level. And so the relationship between employer and worker took on another dimension. And so this did not say, though, when we put these things in place, this did not say that the Joint Industrial Council was going to do peace and harmony, you know, because the work conditions, although the workers are having these new benefits for themselves and their families, but there was still the matter of the day-to-day relationships and the personalities that are involved. We still had to deal with those problems.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Donor. Go ahead, Mr. Brooks.
So forgive me, folks, if I sound like I'm repeating as a donor, but I'm his protege, so I'm open and honest to say that almost everything I know I learned from Basil. Trust. There is, I believe, an inherent distrust in the worker management relationship. And I believe that you all have similar issues, because I found that port workers all over the world are basically the same. They're similar. I've been very fortunate personally. The fact that I'm second generation, I'm son of a port worker, that gave me an advantage. So I understood the mind, I understand the mind of the port worker and how it works. I joined the organization very young, just out of high school. And over time, I went about working, leading, by building relationships. It is important to take a genuine interest in people. And when you do, you find that you end up sharing in the positives and the successes, and also the failures of your employees. You get into knowing family and friends. You are now invited to weddings. You end up at funerals and constantly criticize my family about the amount of funerals that I attend. It's part and parcel. You need to mean what you say. Your word must count for something. If you are unable to grant a request, say it. Now, when you operate from a basis of providing people with information, being as honest as you can at all times, trust comes. And I believe in the court environment. It's very important.
We have a question in the chat, and it says, notwithstanding the matter of trust, how do you see organizations ultimately addressing employees who will still refuse to be vaccinated? Do you see mandatory vaccination as an option?
I do see mandatory vaccination. I believe it is our only option. My personal view. We, however, do need our governments to stand up. Organizations appear willing to push the envelope. We've had a few large media companies has issued an ultimatum vaccines or COVID test results detailed monthly. Several different organizations, about half a dozen that I've seen publicly, and are moving in this direction. However, employers are still unsure as to what type of support the government, through the Ministry of Labor, will give. This issue has not been tested in court yet. I believe that still needs to happen. At some point, we will have to get here. But the level of disinformation and reluctance is chronic. And I do not believe there's any other thing that will fix it than say vaccines are mandatory. Of course, by mandatory, I don't expect this to lift up more people that take vaccines. So in my mind, it's really about restricting certain goods and services from persons who consume.
I noticed that the Jamaica Employers Federation put out a document yesterday in terms of this approach. I don't know if you have had an opportunity to review it and, you know, maybe some of the points that were made there, because it seems to be quite a lengthy process of dialogue and discussion on the matter. Is there anything that you could share with on that?
I didn't get a chance to review the document.
Okay, because one thing that I noticed, and it is a theme that consistently has come out so far this morning as well, is about discussion. It is about providing information. It is, you know, and that is persistent, building trust, you know, not just rushing to the end result, you know, of maybe dismissal of the employee, etc. I know that there was mention, just listening to some discussions yesterday, that for our neighbors in the Eastern Caribbean, from which most of our audience is drawn this morning, that their laws are a little different from ours. There's a bit more leniency in terms of how to relate to, you know, the employee on this matter. But in Jamaica, you know, the process of coming towards any sort of mandatory vaccination or enforcing, you know, if somebody refuses to take the vaccine, getting to the point of dismissal, that is an extended process. But we look to resolution, we look to the information being provided, helping persons to make the decision. We look for a turnaround in this area. I want to sort of segue into another area, just in general, because we're talking about conflict here and managing conflict. Mr. Brooks, what has been your experience of managing shutdowns and strikes on the port? What has happened, you know, in the Jamaican context?
Kingston has the unenviable record of going many decades without a major disruption on the port. It does not mean that we have not had strikes. There have been instances. The last I recall was in 2009, following 2 years of negotiation with unions, trying to get a new labor contract in place. We were not able to agree at the local level. That is through our JIC. And of course, as Mr. Downer outlined, the next step would have been going to the Ministry of Labor, who facilitated discussions. We were still not able to get to any resolution here. And we were referred to the Industrial Disputes Tribunal. which is the next step in our process. And outside of the IDT, their decisions are binding. So if there's still an issue after the IDT rules, the next will be the court. So it's very close to our highest level of, adjudication body. The IDT made some awards. Workers were not happy. They felt it was a dispute with management. But the IDT operates on facts. Presentation of your case, the SAJ went with a better case than the unions. And of course, we're talking about the development of the port, the shipping industry. So the items that were put forward by us were received. One slight something, there was a discussion with workers right before implementation of one of the award. That on the morning in question, it did not go as according to how the CEO of the organization presented it. And that resulted in a strike. Our workers at the time, some of them permanently, who led the effort, resulted in blocking the major thoroughfare that connects the Port of Kingston into the heart of the business district. They blocked the highway for a few minutes. A camera crew, news team was somehow passing, blocking up the information. They made their case. They were able to get the road cleared using the authorities. However, based on how the organization was strategized at the time to manage labor, we had both casuals and a permanent group. So while the permanent group and their unions moved into the offices to have discussions, were later summoned by the Ministry of Labor because of stoppage on the port. It's a big thing, time is money. So the Ministry of Labor summoned us. However, we were able to use the casual workforce that we had at the time to almost nullify the effects of this performance, right? It would have been perilous because at the time, the larger container terminal only used SAJ port workers. So the intention of the union and workers at the time was to cause a complete lockdown. We were, however, able to dodge that bullet by getting our casuals engaged. They went and held the fort. We spent almost 12 hours at the Ministry of Labor that day, going into the night, while our workers were involved in that meeting, thinking they had closed down things. So casual employees were inside and working, and that helped us in that regard. So in that case, how we strategize was able to assist.
Another area, gang sizes. Tell us about gang sizes, because this explain the gang, where we were, where we are now. How did you make that transition? Was there conflict? How was that resolved?
So Mr. Downer alluded earlier about the start of the industry. And in the 1960s, there were over 2,000 port workers, down to almost 200 at SAJ today. We've seen significant changes that have caused a reduction in the amount of people that work. They have not been easy. My father would tell stories that at the time that he joined the shipping industry, half of the workers who were employed at the time had hernias. Caribbean brothers and sisters might call it something that's awesome. But this was due to the hard manual work that port workers did. And in the 1960s, when the decision was made to bring forklifts to the port, caused almost a riot. Workers obviously saw the forklift as something that came to take away their jobs, and that period was not easy. Moved further along, in 1995, when I joined the Shipping Association, a gang consisted of 16 people. We were only able to reduce that through negotiations. At the start of it, that didn't work. Moving to the Ministry of Labour to further discussions, that also didn't work. And the next step was to the industrial disputes tribunal. Made our case, looking at best practices, what was good for the port economically, looking at your partners in the region, looking at international ports, making strong arguments. In our setup, in our way of managing, we have in the past allowed workers, ordinary workers, union delegates to visit other ports. Port of New Orleans. In my time, we went to Panama to see what MIT was doing. And those experiences would have informed our workforce, the leaders of the workforce, to great benefit, delegates. Because they now had this different, more enlightened view of management and how labor is structured from ports that we actually compete with. It wasn't a very difficult sell because you already had people who had seen other experiences and were more amenable to change. And we were able to effect some of those changes through that. I've seen IDT awards where workers have been called as witnesses for the union. But when you listen to his account of his experiences, it's almost as if he made the management mistakes for it. That only came about because these workers got an opportunity to travel, to see what existed in other ports, saw the good sense in it. So we actually were able to reduce gang size in Kingston through an IDT award. It was not done by negotiations only. So I encourage new port operators to also work at your local level, but also rely on your legislative structures that can also assist in this. So it was an IDT award, it was imposed on the workers, and we moved from 16 when I joined to now having a group of 6 persons per year. 4 on the ship, 1 down.
Another, I think the introduction of, we work together on this, what we call e-labor. That's an application, a solution that has been developed by ADVANTUM, and it totally changed how you even recruit your workers, how you schedule your workers. How did the workers respond to that change? And how did you make this? Because from the outside, from our side, it appeared to be quite seamless in terms of the introduction of this method of recruiting your workers for, daily assignments. Can you speak to that a bit, please?
E-labor has been wonderful. Moving to electronic recruiting was also foisted on workers through the industrial peace. We would not have been able to negotiate. So here's the history. Port workers were required to report to a physical location recruiting center twice per day to be assigned. Either a morning shift, night shift, or the following morning. Permanent employees, if they reported on those 2 periods during the day and there's no work, they will be paid guaranteed. We had a large group of casuals, however, who were not guaranteed. And we would see those workers come to the recruiting center as early as 8, 9 o'clock in the morning and stay there until 8, 9 o'clock at night, hoping to get a job. Sometimes people would be assigned, sometimes people would actually go back home without being assigned. Now, can you imagine leaving home, your wife seeing you going off to work, you go to work all week, but at the end of the pay period, there's no money because you actually visited. You're a casual, you don't get paid for visiting, but you go with the hopes of getting a job. You would spend the entire day, only if you're lucky, get a shift that night. So it's not unusual to have somebody sitting waiting for 12 hours, only to later be assigned and 8 hours. It was a challenge. Our workers, by this time, they have evolved. They had evolved from the people that Mr. Donor came and saw, the people who are more educated, through training and other efforts or recruitment efforts. There were no employees who were more tech savvy. They were able to read vessel plans even better than some of the supervisors. They understood the environment, and that knowledge informed them as to which vessels were easy, which vessels were hard. So their ability to come to the recruiting center, walk up to the window when their number was called and assigned, and then try to get a particular job that was favorable to them was something that people held dear. Cherry picking is the term we use. Telephone recruiting threatened to take cherry picking. And it was useful because not everybody served more than one purpose. There's also a security reason, there's a safety reason, benefit I mean, to not having the worker choose which vessel he wants to. They realized very early that telephone recruiting, staying home in the comfort of your home, taking out the phone at a specific interval, entering your PIN and man number, and just being assigned a job based on predefined skill sets, matched with available labor, which just inform you to report to the terminal. They realized the danger in that for them. We no longer could identify the vessel with the automatic piece locks. So if you've got a hype man job, you had nothing to do after the first hour. They resisted. However, we persevered. We had an award. We went through a long period of developing and testing. Started rolling out to our casuals who were most appreciated. Remember, this is somebody who come out for the entire day in some instances and not be assigned jobs. So he could now stay home, make a call, and be assigned a job. The system was so designed that 26 employees can be recruited at the same time. So half of this group here would take up their phones, dial in at the same time, within a few seconds, within 20, 30 seconds, you have put in PIN number, man number, you have been assigned a job and out of the system. That allowed a manual process of calling numbers to come out, fighting them about the jobs. You reduce that to taking on, putting at 25, 26 people at one time. So a labor order for 100 people could now essentially be done in 15 minutes. The system we had forced us into a situation where overtime killed us as it relates to the recruiting staff. We're actually seeing people come in or having to call people via the cell phone, given the challenge with cell network. The recruiting window could run for 6, 7, 8 hours. Telephone recruiting reduced that to 1 hour. It's a wonderful tool for people large.
So in terms of from the workers' perspective, yes, it upset the applicant a bit for some of those who were cherry picking. but for a wider cross-section of workers, it gave more people work.
And the reality is today, I don't see people going backwards. That type of convenience that telephone recruiting offers, people would not want to come back to it. Some of the people who were most threatened against it are now chief advocates of using assisted.
It's like work from home and what COVID has brought to some of us.
Precisely.
We are going to, we're going to take a break now. We have a video that we're going to run during this time. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Downer. Thank you, Terence. We have some comments in the chat about relating to COVID-19 and that discussion. So we're just going to give you a break. You can get up, stretch your legs, you know, come back, or you can watch the video that we have here. But when we reconvene, that would be in approximately 15 minutes. We will take some of the comments in the chat about COVID. And during the break, feel free to drop in some more comments, drop in questions. We want to hear from you. We want the back and forth. Thank you for your attention so far. Thank you, Terence. Thank you, Mr. Downer. So let me just hand over now to our administrator, Mrs. Morgan, and see you back in 15 minutes.
Francis?
Yes, yes.
How long is the break? Should we reconvene?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
The Shipping Association of Jamaica provides Kingston. Essentially, we had two groups, permanent workers on one hand and also casual employees. There were several limiting factors related to our joint labor agreement that prevented us from utilizing the permanent workforce as we needed. We saw telephone recruiting, ADVANTUM e-labor as it's called, as a solution to that problem. Permanent employees, based on their contract with the unions and us, were prevented from working 2 successive shifts after a night shift. They were supposed to be home resting. However, that prevented workers from working the 3rd successive shift, which is the following night. And simply because they were to be home resting, so they could not have been recruited. And recruiting prior to e-labor involved a worker visiting the Shipping Association's recruiting center, waiting on prescribed times, listening for your man number to be called based on a rostering system. And essentially that's how you will receive work. Telephone recruiting, e-labor, fixed that, because essentially the system was designed to allow an employee using a unique PIN number and his man number to access e-labor via the phone or a web interface and be assigned jobs. Casual stevedores would come to the recruiting center, and it would not be unusual for an individual to spend the entire day without being assigned. Because the process at the time is that all permanent stevedores would first need to be assigned work before a casual. So it would not be unusual for a casual employee to report to the recruiting center at 8 o'clock in the morning and not be assigned work until 2 p.m. And at 2 p.m. when the casual employee receives that work ticket, it may very well be for the 11 p.m. shift, or worse, 7 a.m. the following day, which left the worker with a dilemma. Do I travel back home to return to work at 11 p.m.? This is after spending the entire day, mind you, at the SAJ. Or do I stay? Do I find somewhere to get a rest to then start working at 11 p.m. for an entire 7 a.m. shift? So telephone recruiting significantly made life easier for the SAJ stevedore. It meant that you, from the comfort of your home, during prescribed windows, take up your phone or your computer, access the system, which had rules built into it. Essentially, SAJ stevedores in many instances are multi-skilled individuals. So the man who is a lasher on a vessel, it's not unusual to see him also trained as a gantry crane operator, truck driver, or even a stevedore coordinator. So telephone recruiting allowed us to put in respective skill sets. We were able to rank those skill sets. So a crane operator is harder to find. They are smaller in numbers. So of course, the worker's primary skill would be set at crane operator. We'd look at what is second in ranking, what is third, whatever. Terminals would make labor orders using a web interface as well, which would get to the recruiting center. We would review those orders, accept them, and they would automatically populate the work system. At prescribed windows, workers would then start the calling process. Telephone recruiting allowed 26 workers to call the system at any one time, which meant that a process to recruit an order for 200 workers, which would have taken anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, was reduced to several minutes. 26 workers calling the system simultaneously. In 10 minutes, you were able to recruit 200 shifts of work. Different shifts, different skill sets. So essentially, we operated 2 recruiting windows each day. Those are the periods where employees were expected to use their company-assigned cell phones to access labor. With an additional 300 people, we were not able to provide that new group with cell phones based on the agreement. So the recruiting team had the responsibility of calling all of these workers to offer work assignments. You can imagine that when you are depending on a cell network, you are trying to reach 200 people. You have drop calls. You have persons who did not answer on the first call. So you'd make several calls just to reach an employee. That process in itself took several hours. So the recruiting team, who are accustomed to going home at about 5 o'clock in the afternoons, were now going up to 11 and 12 o'clock at nights just to satisfy the labor demands. Again, we needed to confirm with the terminals the persons that were assigned. So telephone recruiting came at the perfect time to handle that type of situation. So these 200 people that were needed for the 11 p.m. shift, in 10-15 minutes, they were all making calls using a CUG phone into telephone recruiting. Their skill sets were matched with the labor orders in the system. Persons were assigned. Those jobs went to a spool file. At the end of the recruiting process, we were able to download those labor orders sent to the terminals via PDF. The recruiting team would then generate physical work tickets from the spool files, and a member of the recruiting team would then have the responsibility to simply go to the terminal's gate and hand these work tickets to persons who were assigned work. That significantly changed the dynamic. We were accustomed at the recruiting center to have droves of people coming in each day. It was home away from home, essentially. They had lockers there. There were recreational activities. The occupational health nurse was stationed there. Offices, their canteen. When telephone recruiting started and the workers were no longer required to spend that time at the recruiting center, we then found ourselves in a situation where we had 6,000, 8,000 square feet of space that was not properly utilized. Telephone recruiting allowed us to sell that building, which was located at a separate address from the SAJ's head office. We were able to sell that building and move into smaller space at the Shipping Association's main building. That allowed us to save on electricity, security cost, just about all the inputs you can think of that were duplicated in having a separate facility. We were able to make that transition by virtue of the efficiency of telephone recruiting. There are some drawbacks. What that also did, despite the positives, was to reduce the interaction that we as management, supervisory level staff had with the workers, because in the new paradigm, they would only come to the recruiting center or HR department if they absolutely needed. Jobs were assigned via phone, the work ticket was presented to them at the terminal gate, and that reduced the interaction. So then we were forced to find new initiatives, different ways of keeping that contact, which we were able to do successfully. But at the end of the day, the significant savings that were accrued, and also the fact that it made life easier for the average worker, was really what was important. ADVANTUM e-labor has been a game changer. It has helped to improve the quality of life of our stevedores. It has brought cost savings to the organization. It has improved our communication and response time to the port facility. And I would not hesitate to recommend this application to port environments or other industrial environments, given the impact it has had on the organization.
The calling system has improved the way we port workers get assigned work. Before, in the older days, we normally had to come to the wharf from 10 in the morning and sit until 6 in the evening without the certainty of getting a work. With the calling system, you can call in either on your phone or you can do it through the website via the internet. That, it saves times, it gives you time to do other things while you secure an assignment for the port. The thing that it takes away from the port is the unity and the camaraderie of the workers, where we would all gather and get to do things and get to know each other better. But it improves us, it's more efficient in that it saves time and save expenses and give us a more efficient way of working.
"11 years later, moving with the technical evolution, the e-labor application has changed, offering a portal to set labor and skill requirement, schedule and deploy workers on shift, real-time alerts to all parties, and communication with port workers and stevedores using an app on their mobile device. With ADVANTUM e-labor, you can effectively manage labor resources, improve labor efficiency and productivity, reduce operational costs, receive insightful analytics and reports to assess and manage performance, seamlessly interface with ADVANTUM payroll application, labor scheduling and management, set labor requirements and work skill definitions, optimize labor coverage and identify training needs by scheduling by skill sets, process wages for hours worked when interfaced with ADVANTUM payroll, workforce planning and labor forecasting, build complex rosters based on skills, preferences, and availability, group employees on the various shifts, build a workforce forecast plan for each department, worker portal via app or web interface, actual time and attendance updates, track projects and labor activity accurately based on hours and costs, gain comprehensive workforce reporting on employee attendance, real-time alerts of staffing anomalies. ADVANTUM, creating efficiency through technology.
The ADVANTUM software suite is a powerful platform for ports, shipping agents, and logistics centers to use to manage their operations and drive efficiencies. The system offers a modular approach to the delivery of solutions, so you can either use the individual modules or any combination seamlessly in one platform. For ports, we recommend a combination of ADVANTUM Port, ADVANTUM Warehouse, and ADVANTUM Motor Vehicle to manage all essential aspects of your operations. ADVANTUM Port is the Caribbean's premier management system for seaports and airports. Now you can manage air and sea cargo manifests, plan and manage vessel operations, optimize space in your yard or warehouse, generate container gate passes and track container gate movement, automate calculation of charges and billing, plus manage all other aspects for highly efficient port operations while seamlessly integrating with your shipping and EDI partners. ADVANTUM Warehouse allows your warehouse facilities to easily process both FCL and LCL cargo. Now you can schedule container shipping, process pick tickets and gate passes, generate container gate passes, apply barcoding technology to warehouse processing, create and manage vessel manifest data, automate calculation of charges and billing, plus get real-time updates with the ADVANTUM Warehouse app. The ADVANTUM Motor Vehicle solution allows importers and exporters to manage vehicle operations by tracking vehicles handled, moved, and stored on the terminal. Our handheld scanning devices allow for up-close RFID or barcode scanning of tagged vehicles, allowing for real-time updates to the system on your motor vehicle inventory and vehicle movement with the ADVANTUM Motor Vehicle app. For more information on these and other ADVANTUM solutions, visit our website at www.advantumpcs.com and contact us for a free consultation or demo. ADVANTUM, creating efficiency through technology. The ADVANTUM software suite is a
Welcome back. Our 15-minute break 15 minutes has passed very quickly, and we want to just jump back into the discussion that what has been taking place. We have a few comments in the chat. One from Mr. Bardui, I hope I pronounced that correctly. The employer is supposed to exercise duty of care to its employees and customers. How then do we address the issue of employee safety during this pandemic as it relates to mandatory vaccination and or testing on a weekly basis? I would ask Mr. Brooks, would you like to take that one?
Okay. Benoit, it is a challenge. We do accept our duty of care. I believe one of the things we've moved to do is to properly document our COVID protocols, have them displayed as much as possible throughout the building, constantly through our occupational health nurse, provide updates, new information, reinforce existing information about how people can properly protect themselves. Sanitizing protocols are still fully enforced. There are machines all over the building. We have attendants who routinely sanitize desks and do handle these type of things. And we also do twice a week misting our the offices using sanitization. And that is our effort as the organization to promote that duty of care that we know we do have. The matter of the testing, in lieu of vaccinations is still a if you want for me, because without proper legislation, without that support, if you demand a test and the employee who will see a test, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever, as prohibited, given the cost, and refuses to do it, then what? That is the pertinent question. And until we are clear, I'm not really sure how that one will work, because these are hard economic times, and I don't know how the average employee will find $15,000 a week to present us with a PCR test. That's still a challenge. So we need our governments to stand up. We need legislation that will support our action.
Just so that persons don't panic when we say $15,000, it's 15,000 Jamaican dollars, which is about 100 US. In another Mr. Downer has dropped in the chat, the number of workers available each day is critical to our operations. What if the workforce experiences a high level of infection, bearing in mind isolation? I think just rephrase that a little, with all of the isolation, what would happen if, we have to consider that? We need to keep going 24/7. In Jamaica, we have had a period now of lockdown. Every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday for the past, say, 3 weeks have been complete lockdown days. But of course, as essential workers, the shipping industry continues to go. But, if the shipping industry, even if we're open and we don't have the people, we don't have the human capital, we too can grind to a halt. So this is just such an important matter. Sylvanus Davis has made an observation, a question as well. It seems to be a very touchy subject. Yes, it's a touchy subject. However, I am of the view that in recruiting of new employees, management should have the right to only employ persons who have been vaccinated. My view is based on the fact that if you currently have 100% or near 100% of your team vaccinated, why should you introduce into this setup an unvaccinated person? I don't know if you'd like to take.
I share Sylvanus's view. While people have a fundamental right to decide what goes into their bodies, what you don't have is a right to work at the shipping association. And based on that view, we've now been asking your recruits to consider vaccination as the only way forward. So after the interview, we have that discussion to see where employees are at, potential employees are at. We encourage, but our position has been, we will not advance to the next round without vaccination. I believe there's no two ways about it.
All right, thanks for that response, Mr. Brooks. As we go into the next segment of our session, I'm going to encourage persons, if you have a comment or a question, remember to drop it in the chat. Also, if you have a comment and instead of writing, you want to actually say something, just raise your hand. We will be monitoring and we will allow you, open your mics so that you can make the comments and ask the questions. The segment that I am going to move on to now, and I think it has been intimated in just the discussion so far, is the importance of investing in people. Mr. Downer, having spent many years at the Shipping Association, is currently a lecturer at the Caribbean Maritime University. And I think that speaks to his commitment of investing in people. And I know that Mr. Brooks has that same, considers that to be very important as well. Mr. Downer, could you just tell us why is it so important? Why is it so important, when you mentioned that many of the port workers, many of the stevedores were not literate in the early days? Up to now, I hear when Terence is speaking, or, the port workers, they could read vessel plans better than some vessel planners to determine which vessels they wanted to be on. I know that at the recruiting center, there was a whole bank of computers where, the stevedores could come in and, stevedores have done CXC, they have really advanced, in their studies. Why is this investment in people so important, Mr. Downer? Please remember to open your camera as well. Thanks.
Mhm. Investment in the workers is very, very important because the industry has changed, new paradigms have been set. And so if we remain, say, in the 1950s, we would have a problem in sustaining our companies. We would have a problem in sustaining our revenues and so on. So initially, what we did is we designed the training courses. At this time, we did not have the opportunity of delivering them ourselves. So we partnered with the Caribbean Maritime Institute at the time and developed training courses for crane operators, winch operators, stevedores, health and safety issues, first aid, and so on. And so we designed these courses, and our workers, we sent them to attend these courses and participate, and they received certificates as well. A little further on, the Shipping Association became an accredited training organization. We partnered with the Heart Trust, the Heart Training Agency, and in this now we qualified. We went through a process to develop our capacity. So the Shipping Association had to change focus, develop this capacity to enter the training arena. And so the SAJ became a training organization. So that means that you could run training courses whether on your own, of your own self, or training courses that were developed otherwise, and certification could be issued to the participants through the Heart Trust. When we have Heart Trust certification, it means that any one of our workers in Jamaica could work in any Commonwealth country. that the certification was accepted. And so that was a big step in becoming an ATO. We did not have to depend on another organization to train our workers. So it means that the member companies, the supervisors, we could train a person from level 1 to level 4. And so this was very beneficial to the member company employees who had to supervise our workers as well. And so what we had coming out of this is that some member company employees started to do shipping and logistics and go into other areas that the Maritime University has to offer.
For those who do not know, the Heart Trust in Jamaica is the Human Employment and Resource Training Trust. It was established in the 1980s, and this was to train, give skills training to, it started at youngsters, young people, late teens, 20s, training in various segments. So it was training in hotel skills, training in agriculture, training in a wide range of segments. And this organization has evolved and partnered, as Mr. Downer has spoken, even with shipping. So there could be the skills training in shipping as well. I see a question from Glenn Roach. Glenn, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Francis. It's more of an observation, really. And I know that we have established that trust is probably one of the most critical elements in reducing the instances of labor management conflict. But I don't think that the role of training could be underestimated in terms of that. The reason I say this is that Mr. Downer's intervention with regard to the type of training that SAJ has embarked on for the lower levels of workers, from the dockers and equipment operators right up, is very critical, because I believe that training is competency-based training and not just theoretical training. Am I correct, Mr. Downer?
You're correct.
Right. And this has brought, it's been successfully implemented in Barbados, and it's brought a new level of understanding to those workers who at that level may not have otherwise had the opportunity to get a certification, which, as Mr. Downer indicated, could be used throughout the other Commonwealth countries. And to the extent that they became more aware of the importance of their jobs, they valued them more. And in the case where you were bringing workers onto the compound that were not certified or were not trained, that was creating some conflict. So you see that it is important that everybody be on the same page with the training, so that they're all recognized and certified as competent port workers, especially in such a critical area where issues as health and safety are also very important. So I just wanted to emphasize that and encourage the ports to invest in the training of their workers to avoid conflict, not only the ones at the supervisory and higher levels, but from the very basic workers. I mean, even in terms of, it was mentioned earlier too, lifting, I don't know how many of us are aware that there are actually specific techniques for lifting, and these have to be trained and understood by the persons doing that kind of work to avoid injury. So I just leave it at that and encourage that there be more training, especially competency-based training, where you have to actually demonstrate the training that you can actually demonstrate what you've learned before being certified, rather than just filling out or writing an answer to a question. So I leave it at that.
Thank you, Glenn. We've spoken a bit about skill training, but then at the supervisory level, and I want to look at the training or at the supervisory level for, especially as it relates to conflict and how to deal with conflict. between workers, you know, maybe supervisors that have to implement, you know, policies and procedures that are not welcomed by the workers. In some cases that maybe the supervisors don't believe in very much themselves. What sort of investment, or how do you do that? How do you, because, you know, the knowledge empowers people to resolve conflict. I know dispute resolution is a big ticket item, so to speak, here in Jamaica, and I'm sure throughout the world. Do you have any thoughts on that, Terence? Mr. Downer, any thoughts?
I don't believe we do enough of it in Jamaica, I'll accept. There are way too many problems at that level. We are still pretty much at a place where a man gets promoted to supervisor because he has been there in the industry a long time. And that is not going to take us where we need to go. We've realized this in Kingston, and as an association, it has been a part on our suite of training webinars that we've done and off-packaged, got external presenters coming and package to our industry partners, because we do believe there's a gap at that level.
Mr. Downer?
Yes, I'd like to add that it is very important because conflict resolution and the ability to resolve conflicts is a skill that has to be developed. So anybody at the supervisory level, from the first level supervisor, must be trained in this area, because without that, it could be disaster.
Can you give me some key points on conflict resolution? You know, just in terms of, you know, for us here.
Yes.
Please.
As Mr. Brooks mentioned earlier, getting to know an individual, your workers, is very, very important, so that you actually become a part of their lives. And so, as he said before, you end up at funerals and weddings and so on. So that level of confidence and the interest become mutual. So they understand you, you understand them, and you would have introduced to the workers what is the purpose of their job, the importance of it to themselves, to their families, to the port itself, and to the country of Jamaica. That is very, very important. So in order to maintain this, one has to have a certain level of not only knowledge, but interest in the individual. And Mr. Brooks mentioned this. I just wanted to mention something else on the point that we discussed previously. The matter of training. We now have the opportunity here in Jamaica, because when CMU started officially their training courses, they were heading mainly to the supervisory and management level. And we at SAG have to point out to them that, look, you need to remember the workers on the shop floor. And so the whole paradigm change and the emphasis on training has changed of the workers. stevedoring is not something you could get acquire in the Caribbean. And there's no university that offers stevedoring training. When you go to up to the north, you have training, but it's not confined to stevedoring. It's about port management and logistics and other things. So we now have and everybody this side of the world, especially South America, everybody travels to Europe to be trained. When I got to Germany in 1993, I discovered that, well, I was the oldest one on the course. Everybody else was 29 and 30. And everybody has to travel to Europe to be trained in any aspect of port management and stevedoring. Now, we have the opportunity here now of getting clients from South America and Central America. And it will be less costly for them to travel all the way to Europe. And we could do it with webinars like we are doing here now for the people in Costa Rica and Panama and wherever. And we could really move on from here, where this training of the stevedores and their supervisors and management generally can be done at this level.
Well, just before we move on, to look at it practically, as a leader, you are required to set the tone. But part of the challenge I've found is that there is wanton lack of respect, is how I would put it. So I encourage you to set the tone as leaders as to what is acceptable behavior from your supervisors. Create the mechanism that employees feel free and are encouraged to report the infraction, report the cases of abuse. It does not happen enough. Workers believe that they're fearful of reporting the supervisor for bad behavior because it will affect work in the future and some other opportunities. So you need to create the environment where people feel empowered and encouraged to come to provide feedback, to make complaints, set a high bar for your level of supervision, and the rest will take care of itself.
How do you create that environment?
Putting the policies in place, be willing to take tough action when policies are breached. Again, it's about training as best as you can. Have your HR people, your training team, identify the courses, train. If you think it's costly to train an employee, train everybody, think of the cost of having them stay in the organization without that training.
In our discussion of just what are the keys to good conflict management, building relationship, worker relationships and trust, the training, the investing in human resources. We spoke a bit about following best practices. And I would say that in the Caribbean, we are establishing some best practices as well. But, looking at models from the IMO, the TDT, Australia, Mr. Downer, you had mentioned those earlier. Investing in ICT support and resources. We touched on that a bit, even in looking at e-labor. And the last point that I want to bring to the table is effective communication. Can I hear from you, gentlemen? Let's start with Mr. Downer on that. Effective communication and its role in building good conflict management. Can you give us some thoughts on that, please?
Yes, although this point is left for last, but it is very critical and very important. Effective communication. Because if I am speaking to you and you're only hearing me, then that doesn't go far enough. There has to be understanding. And in the understanding, there has to be that mutuality of the views going forward, and also of the goals that have to be attained. So effective communication is critical to the matter of conflict resolution.
What are some practical steps in terms of communicating and speaking to persons, is it like, for instance, I know one that even in listening, because listening is a very important part of just the communication process for leaders, from managers to supervisors, maybe even, just my understanding of what you've said is XYZ, you know, just to make sure that the communication is flowing properly. But this is an area that requires training as well as to how to listen effectively, as to how to communicate effectively. Terence, please give us your thoughts on this matter.
It's vitally important. And, you know, it's also useful that we as leaders have the ability to accept the feedback and get it, and also be willing to invite it. So a very important element of my feedback discussion with team members, I always want to know, what can I do to make your job better? What can I do to make you more efficient? What do you want from me? What are the issues that you have with me? Too often we spend time sharing with the employee what we want to hear and never take the time to listen to effectively how you can assist with improving this employee. Are there more tools that you need to provide him? Is there more time that you need to be spending? So the communication, I need to underscore the point, has to flow both ways. If you need to have a thick skin, you need to invite the feedback as well, which also helps you to also grow as an individual and to grow in your level of, you know, management and speak.
Thank you. At this juncture, and on that note of feedback, I'd like to ask, are there any questions? Are there any comments on any of the topics that we have touched on this morning? Just put your hand up or just drop in the chat if you don't want to speak, and let us hear from you. Any comments? Any questions? Any feedback? Remember to unmute.
So people are either asleep or we've done a really good job. I wonder which is it.
I put my hands up. I'm not too sure if you got that.
But no.
Oh, no, I didn't see your hand up, but please go ahead. Let me see.
Mr. Bardwell from Dominica.
All right, it's French, so it's a French name, French surname. It's okay. My thing that I wanted to put forward was that one of the difficulties being experienced today, especially within the port environment, is that we are improving technology constantly to enable us to improve processes, as well as you earlier stated out, to look at the economic side of ensuring that the port can turn a surplus on its operations. And one of the issues that we face is, as we seek to improve technology, we have less reliance on manual labor or systems. And that immediately poses a challenge because it puts a strain on labor management, also finding alternatives for the workers. As you know, the unions then come into play because as you have less need for manual labor or processes, then there is the old issue of how do you replace that in a way that it doesn't create any breaches or any skirmishes, so to speak, with the union and the workforce. And that now sometimes herald a challenge by the union, because the union wants to protect its workforce interests. And there is a dilemma here. And that is why I'm posing the question in terms of, as we do that, because we are a very small society, and we're leaning on technology, yes, but at the same time we're pushing the workforce out of the door. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Who would like to take that one? Or let me just comment. Sometimes, with technology, it's not so much pushing the workers out, but the matter of training steps back to the fore again. It's a retooling, but let me leave Mr. Brooks and Mr. Downer to respond.
I'm sorry, Basil, can you hear that one?
Yes. The question is very important, and because we have been through those challenges. The introduction, as Terence mentioned earlier, of the forklift posed a challenge. And coming down the road, we have had the port labor has become more specialized. Whereas in the early days, it was just a matter of manual labor and how, and strength. Today, it depends more on your level of training and how you use your brain. Because each job has certain techniques that have to be used to get it done. And so brute force and brute strength no longer operates in the port environment. So the new workers have to be trained and climatized to this new situation. And so this is where we have to communicate effectively to the workforce as well as train them.
There's a question here in the chat from Osbert Wilkinson. Most ports due to COVID have seen a fall off in revenues. How do you prioritize spending on training, I would say, versus the replenishing of equipment and such? I hope I have communicated it well, Osbert. So training versus equipment.
That's a difficult one. You need to focus on what is most important. And I could very well imagine scaling back on training initiatives in order to focus on the priorities, because without proper equipment and so on, and volumes falling, then there are no employees to train. So there has to be a delicate balance, and then it's really, for me, a matter of how to prioritize what is most important. We offer regular training webinars at the SAJ, and we have seen a fall off in user attendance, and we do understand we're really dealing with the pandemic and the costs associated. It's understandable.
Martins, I see a question from Delaria Sims. Delaria has her hands up. Now, if you noticed.
And from Frida Nichols as well. So we take Delaria first and then Frida.
Good morning from the Turks and Caicos Islands. We are a little different in the Turks and Caicos in that we don't have labor unions here. We have a very strong employment ordinance, and our conflicts are resolved internally and only referred to the labor department or the labor tribunal after the internal efforts have been resolved, failed. And so that means that the onus then is with management and finding ways to solve those problems. We also have a unique situation in that we don't have stevedoring. Our stevedoring is contracted out. So
you live in paradise.
Yes, I'm beginning to realize that the challenges that we face are kind of different from some of our Caribbean neighbors. But all the same, whenever you have a group of people together, there will be conflict. And being the HR manager, I am the person that is expected to provide some solutions to those problems. So I appreciate the conversation this morning. Topics that really interested me would have been those of building trust. The questions that came up about vaccinations, mandatory vaccinations. What we have done here, we can't mandate that the vaccinations be done. We have about 51% vaccination now with our staff. and still encouraging them to do that, but we made weekly testing mandatory. And we just did that, and I'm beginning to look at it to see how effective that is with regard to how soon we can get the results back in order to make a decision as to who should be in or out of the workplace. So I've just sent out a couple of emails to try to encourage a more timely response with that. The question that came from Osbert about, was it Osbert? The question about training. What we've done is we take advantage of whatever free training we can get through PMAC and other organizations, the Galilee Institute. We've been doing that. And then we do internal training, going over our SOPs and what have you, just trying to maintain the level of efficiency and refreshment training for our staff, because we really don't have the budget to invest in other trainings at this time. So that's what we've been doing here in the Turks and Caicos. And like I said, I really enjoyed the conversation, just to be just a little bit, hybrid in our experience here.
Thanks for that, Delira. Appreciate it.
I'm wondering if any of the other ports here would, and thank you for that, Delira, might want to share their own experience or perspective. So if there are any other port managers that are on right now and want to do that, we'd most welcome in hearing your own perspective of what happens in your individual port.
A reminder that Frida had a comment to make.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. If you're training employees and not updating the supervisors and management on the information that is being communicated to these employees, are we not setting up a situation for disconnection and sometimes even conflict between those levels? And I'm speaking from perspective of being involved in port training since 2000 and training right through dockers, stevedores, supervisors, and management.
That's a good point Frida made. And I'll extend it a little further. The Shipping Association operates, as Francis mentioned, as a registered trade union. We supply labor to the ports. So very often we have negotiations, we come up with new contracts, agreements with the unions that governs workers. But in reality, while we manage workers, they are deployed to a port environment each day, and they are supervised by employees of the port management. And that normally creates conflict because those supervisors are not necessarily informed, updated about the decisions that were made at council under which these workers operate. So I do take your point, Frida. It's a very good one. We need to sort of focus on closing the loop between these training efforts, these new initiatives, and the people that support, supervise their environment. That's a very good point.
Thank you.
So for entities, really what there ought to be is a development plan for all of the employees, so you look at all aspects. So each employee, you can, just set a track that you'd like to, in agreement with the employee. So, so from stevedore, supervisor, manager, and CEO as well, because if as a CEO you do no training, you participate in no training, there's a way that you can become stuck and the world moves ahead of you. I have a comment here from Andrew Charles. The issue of communication is what interests me. Active listening is very important to building trust. Oftentimes, upper management has the ability to speak, but active listening is a skill that all should develop. And yes, upper management and active listening that I do agree with you, Andrew, on that. A skill that needs to be developed. And there has to be active pursuit to develop that skill.
Right. And I want to underscore the point about training for upper management as well. Because imagine you take your employee, you send them out to customer service training, and some bejaja, fills them up with all kind of bright, grand ideas. But they come back to an organization where management is not putting the tools in place for this employee to really, use what they have learned. Then you've wasted money. So there needs to be some attention as well placed on management and their training, continuously as well. Our job is to create the environment for people to excel. And if we're not up to speed with what is happening, if we're not improving our own knowledge and thinking, we're in trouble.
We have only a few more minutes left in our session. Still open the floor to any comments, any of the port managers who are on, who want to speak to their experience, in any of the areas that we have addressed. Okay. And before I hand back over to Glenn, I want to just thank you for participating. I want to thank Mr. Brooks and Mr. Downer for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. I want to go back to just the keys to good conflict management. Effective communication. Active listening is one that stands out for management. Building worker relationships and trust. Following best practices, models from the IMO, from the ILO, but also models that are available within the Caribbean. The importance of benchmarking, investing in human capital through Caribbean Maritime University, through PMAC and the training, and other areas through HEART. And even though that investment may be difficult in this time of, the pandemic time, where the resources are being strained, let's look out for some of those training opportunities that, are cost-free, because it can only make the team better. And finally, investing in ICT support and resources. So I thank you for your attention. I thank you for, listening in and your participation. And I hand back to Glenn Roach at this point.
Thank you very much, Francis. And I must commend you, Mr. Brooks, and Mr. Downer on making this discussion very engaging, interesting, and informative. And though it is not intended to be a full course, we will certainly be looking at following up on some of those key areas that you identified in terms of having actual workshops on those. So again, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out to be with us this morning and sharing your expertise. And just want to emphasize that PMAC, like the SAJ, our interest is primarily in training. And Mr. Downer will be happy to note that currently PMAC is offering stevedoring, the CMU stevedoring certification. And we have that already implemented in 3 of our member ports, namely St. Lucia, St. Kitts, and St. Vincent. So we have started on that journey to including all levels of staff in certified training. And we started at the level of stevedoring, but as we look down the road, we'll be looking to include other aspects and other levels of staff in that training. This has just been one of our monthly training initiatives. So you can look forward to being informed of what we'll have offered for the coming months. And we usually will have that at the end of the last week in every month. So there's training to look forward to, and we hope that you will take advantage of the opportunity to participate wherever it is offered. So with that, I'd just like to conclude and wish you all a very good afternoon, and until next time.
Thank you. Pleasure was mine.
Thank you.
Thank you.